Hey everybody, welcome back to Bible Fun with the Duns. Today we read Isaiah chapter 35 and 36, two chapters that really were meant to go together in the full scope of the story. Mama, what you got first?
Well, I love 35, as you can guess, because it's a good reminder of the goodness of God and His promises and that He will be with us. And then it leads into this time of shakiness and doubt in chapter 36. I've always been interested in the story of King Hezekiah and Sennacherib coming up against him. And I just think it's such a clear picture of the way the enemy attacks the followers of God. Sennacherib, tries to make him question things. He tries to make him doubt things. He's making him question God and making him doubt God. And he plants things in his mind like, oh, well, all these other nations, their God didn't save them, so how could your God save you? And he's even trying to make them forget the past. If you remember just a couple of chapters ago, in chapter 33, the Bible clearly told us that yes, God is using Assyria as a tool for judgment on these countries, but Assyria will not be allowed to continue on. Assyria has not been followers of Yahweh, and they will also be destroyed. Even though they're being used for a moment, their end will come. And in the end of that chapter, it blows my mind because it's talking about victory for God's people. It's talking about the Lord is going, it literally says in verse 22, the Lord is our King, He will save us. And so just again, that tactic of the enemy, trying to make us forget who God is to us, trying to make us forget who God has been in the past, what He's done, and trying to make us forget promises of God, and just look at our present and the trial that we're facing right there at the moment and forget everything God has always shown us.
Yeah. While you're talking, I guess my biggest takeaway from this is how both of these chapters pair together in a way where God is preparing something pretty in 35. And then in 36, there's an attack from an enemy. Now, in my Bible, I wrote in the kind of the margins that this was an attack by an enemy at the gate. And now you notice that the enemy didn't come with the obvious kind of attacks. He didn't come with his big army. He didn't come with a lot of artillery or swords.
He came with the worst ones to me, mind games.
He came with mind games. And so we're in chapter 35. We read this and we rejoice that what looks like the end, because, for 34 previous chapters, it's been kind of messages of woe. But now in 35, the Lord's looking ahead and He's promising to create something new. And so I took all of this and I put it in the bigger story of the Bible, and I started to go back to like creation itself. So when you go back to creation, you've got a couple of chapters where God is creating this beautiful paradise. And if you go to 35, it talks about how the Lord is going to make from the wastelands, He's going to make something, the desert bloom, it's going to blossom. There's going to be abundant trees. That's what it's talking about with the glory of Lebanon, the excellence of Carmel and Sharon, this beautiful grasslands and flowers. And it says in the end of verse 2 is, and they shall see the glory of the Lord and the excellency of our God. Orville. Be the excellency of God, okay? And so if you go back to Genesis, you've got a couple of wonderful chapters of God literally creating sun, moon, stars, trees, flowers, beautiful things. And then in the next chapter, you get an attack. And it doesn't come with armies and it doesn't come with spears and swords. It comes with words again. Has God really said that you shouldn't eat of that fruit?
Doubt.
And this doubt, mind games. And so there's an enemy kind of just with words. That's all it is, just words and bluster. And the enemy is just going ahead and saying, listen, I'm going to defeat you. I've always defeated you. We've always defeated everybody. So just go ahead and surrender and I'll take care of the rest later. But you just go ahead and surrender. So it's just beautiful creation, then an attack of just the mind. And so you take that, and then you come to Isaiah. That's what's happening in chapter 35, a discussion about beautiful like recreation, and then a mind game attack in chapter 36, where everything Hezekiah just heard what God's going to do. Now he's got an enemy at the gate saying, no, you just, did he really say that? Did he really mean that? Are you really interpreting that right? And come back and just go ahead and surrender to me. Well, then you say, well, where do you go from there? I want you to fast forward a little bit. So then you go to the New Testament. And in the New Testament, you've got this scene where Jesus begins his earthly ministry. And he is doing things that nobody else has ever done before. He's doing things that the prophets had never done before. He's healing in ways. He's restoring. So he is in the middle of this recreation, but in a work where among people, he's casting out demons and calming storms and feeding multitudes. And then all of a sudden there's a mind game that happens. And so when you go to the book of Matthew and you go to chapter number 11, you find John the Baptist in prison. Okay, so John the Baptist is in prison, and listen, John the Baptist is this kind of wild man who's lived out in the wilderness most of his life, and now he's at this kind of this bottom moment because he's in prison, he's about to die.
And his whole calling was to say, the Messiah is coming.
That's right.
Jesus is coming.
Jesus is coming. So you got this guy who's lived in freedom his whole life, now confined to a cell. And he starts to kind of go through doubt, and you got to know it's the enemy in his ear. Like, you've wasted what are you doing? What do you have to show for it? All this. And so John the Baptist sends some of his disciples to Jesus in Matthew 11 and says, are you the one we're looking for, or do we look for another? And Jesus says, hey guys, follow me for the day and come tell John. And so they see him like doing miracles and healing people. And Jesus says, go back and tell John the Baptist. Matthew chapter 11, I'm probably just going to read this because it's going to sound familiar to you. So Matthew chapter 11, verses 4 to 6, here's what he says. And Jesus answered them and said, go and tell John the things which you hear and see. So they had heard these things and seen them all day. And here's what he said. The blind see and the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed and the deaf hear, the dead are raised up and the poor have the gospel preached to them, and blessed is he who is not offended because of me. So what Jesus is doing, he's actually going all the way back to Isaiah in this moment, Isaiah 35 verse 5, where he says, then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf shall be unstopped, the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the dumb shall sing. He said, remember everything I told you in Isaiah 35? He said, now, he's the fulfillment. And how do you know? Because you've seen it all day. Now go back and tell John. So what if now you've got 3 perfect pictures of creation and beauty, and then mind games from the enemy at the gate to the Lord is going to come through anyway. He's going to defeat the old serpent. He's going to defeat Sennacherib. He's going to defeat the doubts. And John the Baptist is not going to get called out or criticized because of his doubts. Hezekiah is not going to get called out or criticized because of his worry. It's just the Lord's going to step in and he's going to do this. And the king of Assyria, who has no concept of the Lord, nor of Rabshakeh, the guy, this captain who's coming and making all he's got is words, but he doesn't have power. And yet what we're seeing here is our God is a God of power and of words. He's got the words to make he's got the power to make the words come true. And so when you piece all of this together, you've got the God of creation up against the enemy with the mind games, but the God who says, I'm going to take this. And he may bite at the heel, but I'm going to crush his head. At every step of this, the Lord's just going to see his work and his people through. That's what I saw when I see this. You got any more to add? You think that's good?
That's good.
All right. So we'll see you tomorrow in chapters 37 and 38. Bye.
Bye.